Welcome to this session on the theory of public key cryptography. And we'll start with our first talk now. I wanted to say, to remind you all that the rump session is tonight. And if you want to present, then please do send your slides by 1 p.m. So we'll start with our first talk. This is Deniable Authentication When Signing Keys Leak by Suvradeep Chakrabarti, Dennis Hoffheinz, Uli Maurer, and Guilherme Rito. And Guilherme will give the talk. Thank you.
Okay, so hi. Welcome to this presentation on deniable authentication when signing keys leak. This is joint work with Suvradeep Chakrabarti, Dennis Hoffheinz, and William Maurer. Okay, so let's start with some motivation. The basic guarantees that secure messaging applications should give are confidentiality and authenticity. And because we tend to have like long-lived sessions on our phones on these applications, current messaging applications also try to give us guarantees like forward secrecy and backward secrecy. Forward secrecy guarantees us that if all parties want to delete the chat history, then they can do this. And backward secrecy gives us guarantees that even after a party's phone is compromised, it is possible to recover, for example, confidentiality. So, but then there are a few questions, which are, for example, what if some parties want to keep a chat history? In this case, forward secrecy gives us no guarantee. And what if some parties are dishonest? In this case, neither forward secrecy nor backward secrecy give any guarantee. So then, what can we hope for in these cases? Well, one guarantee is off-the-record deniability. So consider the following setting. There are two parties who are chatting, Buggles and Video. Buggles is dishonest and is the owner of this phone. And Video is honest and is a killer. There is also another party who is Judy, and Judy is dishonest. It's a judge. So the thing is that Video killed the radio star, so Buggles will try to convince Judy that Video killed the radio star, and off the record guarantees that even if Buggles gives Judy its phone, all its secret keys, and cooperates in any way, Judy should not be convinced that Video killed the radio star. Okay, another guarantee that we may want is consistency. So consider what if Video now creates a chat group called Killer Confession, and there are three parties in this group. There is Buggles, who now is honest, Video, who now is dishonest, and the third party is Grace, and Grace is honest and is an inspector who is looking for Radio Star's killer. So now Video's goal is going to be to try to somehow frame Buggles, and one thing it could try to do is to just send malformed ciphertexts that will decrypt differently in Buggles and Grace's phones. For example, the following could happen. So Video comes up with some ciphertexts that in Buggles' phone, which is here in dark mode on the left, will show up as if it was asking, did you know that I killed the radio star? And Buggles would just reply, yes, finally you're confessing, or a confession, yes, I did. But on Grace's phone, it would show up as, did you kill the radio star? And then Buggles' message would look a bit bad. Okay, so there is a type of schemes that essentially give us all these guarantees, which was introduced by Maurer et al. Last year. And this is MDRS-PKE, or Multi-Designated Receiver Signed Public Encryption Schemes. And actually, they also give us anonymity. I'm not going to explain why this is also useful for secure messaging, but I am not going to explain you why in this presentation. Okay, so let's have, again, another look at this off-the-record deniability. So I was telling you that Buggles was dishonest and was trying to convince Judy that Video sent this message. But it could also be that Buggles is honest and that there is some other party, imagine Eve, who just looked up over Buggles' phones and saw in the phone a message from Video saying that it killed the radio star. We want that in any way, Judy will not be convinced that video killed the radio star, regardless of whether it's just Eve cooperating with Judy or if Buggles is also cooperating with Judy. So to summarize, if Buggles is honest, Eve will be cooperating with Judy, and in this case, Judy only knows public information. And if Buggles is dishonest, then Judy will know public information, but now also Buggles' secret keys. But then there is a question. So video is under suspicion, so what if Judy maybe could get somehow video's secret keys? And this is the setting that we consider in this work. For instance, if Buggles is honest, then Judy will know public information and video secret keys. And if Buggles is dishonest, then Judy will know all public information, Buggles' secret keys, and now also video secret keys. Okay, so another thing that's also very important is the scalability of MDRS-PKE schemes. There are two types of scalability. First, there is scalability in terms of security. So we want that security should be independent of the number of users and the number of messages. And of course, this is very important for messaging. And another thing that we also want is that if you have a chat group with n participants, the ciphertext size and the encryption and decryption times should be at most linear with the number of participants. So the thing is that in prior work, the only existing MDRS-PKE construction, the security actually degrades with the number of users. And on the other hand, for a chat group with n participants, the ciphertext size, the encryption and decryption times all grow quadratically with the number of users. So what we do in our work is to give the first scalable construction, where security is actually independent of both the number of users and the number of messages, and where for a group chat with n participants, the ciphertext size and the encryption and decryption times only grow linearly with the number of participants. Okay, so now let's just have a brief overview of how to construct an MDRS-PKE scheme. So there is a very simple way to construct such a scheme, and as building blocks, we use public encryption for broadcast and a multi-designated verifier signature scheme. The main idea for this construction is to use the MDVS scheme to sign the receiver's PKE-BC public keys and the message, and then encrypt everything using this PKE-BC scheme. So we encrypt the sender's and the receiver's MDVS public keys, the message, and the signature. The final ciphertext is just this PKE-BC ciphertext. So we have to make sure of a few things to make sure that this scheme is scalable in terms of security. One of the things is that the security reductions to the underlying PKE-BC schemes and MDVS scheme are tight. And actually, yes, they are from the existing construction by Maurer et al. Another thing we have to ensure is that there is actually PKE-BC scheme with tight security reductions to standard assumptions, and the answer to this is also yes. However, there is no MDVS scheme with tight security reductions to standard assumptions, and this is the first problem we consider in the paper. So another thing is about efficiency. For example, consider that we are sending a message to our receivers. On one hand, we already have an MDVS scheme by Damgaard et al., which achieves signature size and both signing and verifying time, which are linear in the number of receivers. However, we don't have any PKE-BC scheme where the ciphertext size, encryption, and decryption times only grow linearly. It's actually quadratic. So this is the second thing we do in the paper. And so to summarize, we give the first MDVS scheme with tight reductions to standard assumptions. And our construction is actually conceptually simple. The signature size and both signing and verifying time only grow linearly with the number of verifiers. We also give the first PKE-BC scheme, whose ciphertext size, encryption and decryption time grow only linearly with the number of receivers. Just a small note that we actually prove both schemes to be tightly secure under adaptive corruptions. Okay, so now I'm going to give you like a brief overview of how to construct a simplified version of our MDVS. So we only consider single verifier. And yeah, we'll see how to make it tightly secure. Okay, so first let's just have a brief recall of the idea of the security notions for DVS schemes. So for authenticity, we want that an adversary cannot forge signatures on messages that were never signed. And here, the adversary gets no secret keys. The second property is off the record, and there are two cases for this property. So either the verifier is dishonest or the verifier is honest. When the verifier is dishonest, we want that real signatures are indistinguishable from forgeries created by the dishonest verifier using his own secret key. And here, the adversary gets both the signer's secret key and the verifier's secret key. If the verifier is honest, however, we still want that real signatures are indistinguishable from forged signatures, but this time these forged signatures are generated without knowledge of any secret keys. In this case, the adversary gets access to the signer's secret key. Okay, so let's try to construct this. A first construction will use a Nike scheme and a public encryption scheme. So the key pair of a signer is just a Nike key pair. The key pair of a verifier will be the Nike key pair plus a PKE key pair. To sign a message, what the signer does is it just computes a Nike shared key with the receiver, with the verifier, and then it will encrypt this shared key concatenated with the message under the public key of the receiver. The ciphertext is just the signature is just the ciphertext. Okay, so I'm not going to explain you how the verification goes, but I think it's clear that this scheme is authentic because, I mean, no one can compute this shared key unless they have at least one of the secret keys. And on the other hand, it also satisfies this off-the-record guarantee, even if the signer's secret key leaks to the adversary, because we are using this PKE scheme. There is one problem with this, which is there are no known Nike schemes which are tightly secure under standard assumptions. So we now try to fix this. And to fix this, we'll actually try to understand what is the role of the Nike in this previous construction. So we are using the Nike on one hand to get authenticity because only the signer and the verifier can compute this shared key. And on the other hand, we are also using it to get off the record because the dishonest verifier can also compute this Nike shared key, so it can also forge signatures. So if you think about it, this Nike, the role of it is actually to, in a way, prove an OR statement. So it's being used to prove that either the signer really signed this message or the verifier actually forged a signature on this message. So now taking this into account, let's try to come up with another scheme. And now we will use an ISK, a PKE scheme, and a one-way function as building blocks. And this time we will have public parameters. So the public parameters are an ISIC, the CRS for an ISIC, and a public key of this PKE scheme. A signing key pair is similar to before, except that now it's a pre-image and the corresponding image of the one-way function. And the verifier key pair is also essentially a one-way function pair, so it's a pre-image and the image of a one-way function. And now also with a PKE key pair. Okay, so how does the signing work? So to sign, what the signer does is it encrypts its own secret key, so the pre-image of its one-way function public key, the message, and a bit one that we'll ignore, under the public key that is under the public parameters public key. Then it will encrypt a bit one used under the verifier's public key, and it will use the NISC to prove the following statement. It will prove that if this ciphertext C that the verifier can decrypt is encrypting a bit one, then the ciphertext CPP, encrypted under the public parameters public key, must contain a pre-image of either the signer's public key or of the verifier's public key. And it also encrypts them. Yeah. So the signature will then be a triple consisting of the ciphertext encrypted under the public parameters public key, the ciphertext encrypted under the receiver's public key, and this NISC proof. Okay, so to verify a signature is actually very simple. We just need to first verify if this NISC proof is valid, and then if it is valid, we will decrypt whatever is encrypted in the ciphertext. Okay, so now what about forging signatures? So to forge a signature, in case the verifier is dishonest, this is really simple because we just do exactly the same that we did for in a normal signature. The only difference now is that instead of encrypting the signer's secret key, we are encrypting the verifier's secret key. What about public forgeries? Well, essentially, what we do is we encrypt just zeros. Because if you remember the statement from before, the statement was saying that if C encrypts a 1, then CPP encrypts a pre-image of either the signer's public key or of the verifier's public key. However, in this case, we can just encrypt under this verifier's public key the bit 0 because the secret key of the verifier will not leak to, in this case, the adversary or 2D. So this will be indistinguishable. And because it is encrypting 0, then this CPP does not have to include any secrets. Okay, so then we can still generate a valid NISC proof. And yes, this is like the main idea of our construction. So yeah, I guess I'm ending a bit early, but yeah, so this is the main idea for the presentation, for the construction of this DVS. And yeah, so thank you, and thanks.
We have time for a quick question. All right, let's start. Oh, sorry.
I have a quick question, because in your encryption scheme, you encrypt the private key of one of the parties.
Yes.
Regarding the existing public key infrastructure. And intuitively, this could cause a leakage of the secret key. And why is this intuition wrong, or isn't it?
So the thing is that this public key should be, we only encrypt secrets under the public parameters public key, and we just assume that this public key is sampled and no one actually knows the secret key. Yeah. Does this answer your question? Okay. Cool. Thanks for the question.
Just a quick question. I think I know the answer, but I want to double check. So we had like an old paper maybe 15 years ago about impossibility of I guess deniable authentication. I mean, just for two parties, again, it's adaptive corruption since this GUC framework, but it was like under like online deniability. I'm just curious, A, how do you kind of reconcile with this, and B, in light of this impossibility, do you really recommend using your scheme given, I don't know, that the most general thing is impossible? So we have this online deniability, again, it's like if you kind of prove in the judge while you're sending messages, you're actually trying to prove to the judge that you're sending the message.
Yes.
But I don't know if you're aware of this work. If not,
I am aware. I don't remember exactly the setting there. So the thing is that I also have like, there is another paper studying composable notions, not for MDRS-PKE, but for MDVS, and these are like the case of a single verifier would capture that. And for that, it is actually possible to achieve them. So I do not know exactly what was proven impossible, so it's a bit hard for me to comment.
Well, we can take it offline. Yeah, it's
yes.
very interesting work. So just, yeah.
Okay.
What is your guess?
No, it's in this case, it's clear again as this adaptive corruption. I mean, I can see the attacks why it doesn't satisfy our notion. I'm just curious if this, the notion is right for practice or not. But yeah.
Yes, but maybe one thing that I can say is that this is also captured in a way by the security notions, because if you ask, for example, if you're playing the game of can I distinguish real signature from forged ones, and if you set a party to be like, if you ask, you have an oracle, right, to get either real signatures or forged ones by some, let's say, publicly forged ones in this case. And the thing is that if you do this, then you cannot later just ask for the secret key of the verifier, because if you would do that, then you would be able to verify it, and this would contradict unforgeability.
You need to decide in advance which of the two notions, and in our case you can decide adaptive.
Yes, so I don't know if the impossibility result is related to that or not, but if it is, then...
Let's take it offline.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
Thanks for the great discussion, but let's move to the next talk. Let's thank the speaker again. So the next talk is Let Attackers Program Ideal Models, Modularity and Composability for Adaptive Compromise. And this is by Joseph, and he'll give the talk.
Thanks for the introduction. Hello, world. Hello, Zoom. So, I'm going to talk to you about my paper, where I really am trying to dig into how should I write these definitions in the adaptive compromise setting. First, let me give you the quick 2-second summary in case anyone needs to run to the hallway track. I point at a previous definition of mine in a paper with Nirva and Tyagi, and I show some ways in which it makes me sad. I can't prove everything I want to. In this work, I give a new version of the definition where I can prove all the old things and these new things, so it makes me happy. Very quickly, the changes that were needed for the definition. Firstly, we need to force the simulator to be explicit in how it's going to program the ideal models. The attacker, weirdly enough, is also being allowed to program the ideal models. Ideal model, think random oracle model, ideal cipher model, stuff like that. And thirdly, a point which I won't be touching much on in this talk, is I need to be careful about how I quantify the simulator to require simulators that work for all attackers. Okay, let's go over it in a bit more detail now. Firstly, I'm talking about what I'm calling the adaptive compromise setting. You'll find it all across cryptography with a variety of different terms for this kind of broad idea. We're thinking about a number of users that are doing some cryptography, interacting with each other. An attacker views their communication, and then based on that, decides to yoink some keys and see what it can learn. This arises in many settings, different types of primitives, tons of different definitional frameworks. And like I said, I'll be kind of working in a setting from a previous paper of mine. Broadly, it was working in an online simulation setting. There's a real world and an ideal world. The attacker's trying to distinguish between them. In the real world, it interacts with the actual algorithms of the scheme. In the ideal world, which is parameterized by a particular kind of leakage function, it interacts with some simulator which tries to simulate the output of the real scheme given only leakage about the queries. To be slightly more concrete about this, for the kind of CPA version of the definition, you have two interfaces with which you can interact with the scheme. First, you can ask for encryptions of messages. Second, you can ask to be given the secret decryption key. In the ideal world, the simulator has to simulate ciphertext given only the length of the message. And then later, when it's trying to fake keys, it's given all of the messages that were previously encrypted. I also give definitions for pseudo-random functions. Works very similar, replacing encryption with evaluation of the PRF. In the ideal world, the output in the evaluation case is forced to be uniformly random strings not known to the simulator. They're given to the simulator later during exposures. Two things which are not shown so far, which will become important later in the talk. Firstly, a definition like this requires ideal models. A proof by Nielsen using the same techniques shows this fact. And also the definitions in the previous paper were all multi-user definitions, which I haven't really represented here. Okay, so first let me just say, what were the nice things about the old definition? It allowed these nice modular proofs of kind of complicated primitives, which I break into kind of 3 levels of proof. The higher level proofs were proving security of some complicated protocol or something based on a SIM-AC notion. Intermediate proofs are the ones I think of where I use some SIM-AC definition to prove a different SIM-AC notion for a related construction. The previous paper was mainly doing different kind of encryption schemes based on PRFs. And finally, the kind of lowest level is where we do the actual analysis, where we dig into ideal models and do these reprogramming proofs about random oracles being good PRFs, ideal ciphers being good PRFs. In my current work, I show some kind of shortcomings with high-level and intermediate-level proofs, where there are some examples here where I can't prove the thing which I really feel like I should be able to. Okay, now that I've set that up, I'll broadly give you an outline of both the rest of the talk and the contributions of my paper. First, we'll dig into what the shortcomings of SIM-AC are like. We'll show my new SIM*AC definition, which fixes these shortcomings. And these are related to different settings where the same ideal primitive is getting used multiple times. I don't want to have to restart from scratch. Luckily, I can kind of show that all of the old results shown in the previous paper lift over to this new paper. And finally, to kind of link into the existing literature on adaptive compromise, which is, a lot of work has been done on public key encryption, I give public key encryption definitions compared to previous definitions and show some nice results that natural constructions are secure. Okay, so let's start by talking about the shortcomings. And to dig into this, I'm going to start by kind of extending my definition to include those things I omitted before. First, let's be explicit about how the ideal model is captured. In the real world, you just actually access this ideal model, which is being used by the construction. In the ideal world, the simulator has complete control over the ideal model. To make it multi-user, you just have multiple instances of the protocol in the real world, and in the ideal world, these are all emulated by the simulator. Here I'm showing it with SIM-AC PRF, but kind of everything I say for the next couple of minutes holds with respect to any of the SIM-AC definitions, except one, but that's a weird corner case. So let's ask ourselves a natural question. Does single-user security imply multi-user security with these definitions? And to kind of help us remind what's happening, I gave us the single-user security definition in the upper right-hand corner. So we want to distinguish between a real world, where there are 2 instances of the protocol, and the ideal world, where we get to try to simulate this. The natural way to simulate it is to just have 2 different copies of your single-user simulator, one for each user. How do we want to prove this? A nice hybrid game-hopping proof. First, we switch to a hybrid world where there's a single simulator. If you kind of draw a box around the difference, you can say, the difference here looks exactly what the single-user security was giving us. Then you can hop from the hybrid world to the ideal world. Again, drawing a box around the difference, you go, yes, that's exactly what single-user security was giving us. But so far, I've lied to you, because that's not what single-user security was. This is what single-user security was. There's this ideal primitive floating around, which gets completely replaced by the simulator. So if we start trying to plug that into our pictorial proof here, in our first hybrid step, when we do our reduction, the ideal primitive will be replaced by the first simulator. Now, the second construction isn't querying the ideal primitive anymore, it's querying this random simulator that we don't really know anything about. But if there's no ideal primitive anymore, I can't do the second step of the proof, because my single-user security definition required there to be this ideal primitive. We could have also kind of noticed the issue if we tried to start from the other direction of when we're defining our simulator, how is it going to respond to ideal primitive queries, and it's just completely unclear because we have these two different simulators, each of which expects complete control over the ideal simulator. So, kind of stepping back, not just the multi-user to single-user setting, the issue here is that the simulator completely replaces the primitive P, and that prevents any sort of proof where we want to multiple times use security that's based on this primitive. Here's a variety of different examples where I identified this. The ones with asterisks are kind of from the previous paper, where the previous paper gave positive results just by assuming that different ideal primitives were used in different places. The ones without asterisks are new examples that I point out here. Okay, a first solution you might try is to just not reuse the ideal primitive. This is what the previous paper was assuming. This is somewhat nice to do if you have random oracles. We have this idea of domain separation. Polari, Davis, and Gunther gave a nice formalization of that, and yeah, it's fairly efficient. You can do that. I have kind of two issues. One, sometimes I'm using an ideal cipher, much less clear how to do efficient domain separation. Two, at just a kind of aesthetic, theoretical level, I find it very unsatisfying because these definitions really shouldn't require domain separation. So I'd like my proof and my definitions to somehow capture this fact. So how are we going to resolve this tension where the two different simulators want to both control the ideal primitive? The idea is we're going to kind of slightly tweak how we're thinking about the ideal primitive. We're always now going to think about it as being lazily sampled. You only define its output on input X when you actually need that output. And secondly, we're going to add this kind of backdoor interface into the ideal primitive where we let someone give it an X and Y and say, please make P of X equal Y. So let's change our SimAC definitions to get Sim star AC, where now both worlds use this modified ideal primitive, and importantly, in the ideal world, the simulator is given access to this kind of backdoor interface. Now it's clear how our multi-user proof's ideal world should work. We just still have the ideal primitive with both simulators accessing it. Let's try to kind of fill in the rest of the proof again. I can draw my box. Things match again. I can draw my second box. The inside of the box matches my single-user definition. So it feels like we should be happy, but still we're not quite happy. The issue here is that in this kind of pictorial proof, the reduction is using its own oracles to simulate the things inside the box, and it's supposed to locally simulate the things outside the box. However, the thing outside the box is the first simulator who expects to be able to program the ideal model. So I changed my definition slightly, and in the real world, I let the attacker do this really weird thing where it can just program it. This doesn't really seem to correspond to anything that means anything in practice, but makes all the proofs go together and gives us these nice kind of compositions. This was actually proposed also in a kind of different UC setting to show that nice composition results hold. And when you kind of really dig into the guts of what's happening, the reasons why this works nicely for SimAC and why it worked nicely for UC is the same kind of underlying ideas. Very briefly, multi-user security, Cascade PRF. I can write proofs for them now if we start with Sim star AC. There's this other technical detail about the simulation needs to be a universal simulator if you want more than a constant number of rounds, for example. We also want the old results from the previous definition to hold, and indeed they do. The high-level results are just kind of free, because my new definition is stronger than the old one. The intermediate results aren't quite as free, but they're basically free because all of the proofs in the previous paper were sufficiently black box that we can kind of shove in the new definition without having to do anything fancy. The low-level proofs technically have to be rewritten. The main ideas are the same, and you get essentially the same bound where we think of any programming queries as being ideal model queries. I also gave definitions for Sim star AC with asymmetric encryption. The definitions work very similar to symmetric encryption, but now we're having the two different types of compromise that make sense with public key encryption, which is sender exposure, where you're given just the randomness that was used to encrypt some message, and receiver exposure, when you're given the actual decryption key. In terms of simulation, the encryption simulation and decryption simulation work kind of the same. My arrows here are backwards on the bottom, by the way, but sender exposures, you're given just the message to the simulator for that one encryption that's being compromised. Or receiver exposures is when we give the simulator all of the previous messages. I also give definitions for key encapsulation mechanisms. It's basically the same thing. You just switch encryption and decryption with encapsulation and decapsulation. And in the ideal world, the response to encapsulation, the key is chosen uniformly at random, not known to the simulator. It's given later to the simulator on exposures. What are we able to prove this definition? Lots of things that I think are nice. Chem-dem hybrid encryption just works the way you would want. If the chem and dem are CPA or CCA secure, then the hybrid PKE scheme is CCA or CPA secure. And because of these nice composition properties, the chem and dem are able to use the same ideal primitives if needed, which would not have been the case with the old definition style. We can relate this to a result by Hoyer and Portering, who also had looked at kind of chem-dem in these selective opening settings. They used slightly weaker assumptions for some piece of it, slightly stronger assumptions for another piece, and they proved a weaker selective opening CCA definition. I also looked at different variants of what I'll call kind of hashed chem, which is different things where you take some weaker chems achieving some sort of one-wayness notion, you hash the output with a random oracle, and you hope that that gives you either CPA security or CCA security. Examples here include kinds of hashed El-Gamal schemes, as well as some variants of Fujisaki Okamoto. And basically, I'm able to prove them secure with my definitions. I generally expect that any kind of natural public key encryption schemes based on random oracles will work with these new definitions. I just selected some nice ones for my proofs. Finally, I want to kind of understand how these SIMAC definitions fit in with the framework of existing definitions. First, the SIM-star definition, you can write down a corresponding non-starred version, as you would expect. The star one implies the non-starred one. The non-starred one is kind of morally very similar to this notion of full SIM that was introduced previously. There are small differences between them. Full SIM only considered random oracles and only considered single-user security. It will run into those same issues that you can't really prove multi-user security with it. And they included labels in their public key encryption definition, which I didn't choose to, though it's not essential to the definition either way. As you would hope, these SIMAC definitions imply normal in CCA. And these SIMAC definitions were really written intentionally to be super strong, in some senses too strong. And because of that, basically any selective opening definition that I can find in the literature is indeed implied by SIMAC CCA. So I've reached the end of my talk. Here's the summary of my contributions again. Happy to take any questions.
We have time for a quick question.
I was wondering, in your picture with the boxes, when you have two simulators that both are allowed to program the, say, random oracle, for instance, what happens if they both want to define the output on the same input and they don't agree on what the output should be?
Sure. So there's kind of two different ways you could consider defining it. One would be that kind of the second person to try to do this programming, their programming fails. The other version would be it succeeds and it just overwrites what was previously in the random oracle. I went with the version where if you try to program something that's already defined, the programming fails. My impression is that the same sorts of results would imply with either version of the definition, but when I was kind of playing around with it, I think the version I used is easier to write proofs with, though it also comes with these kind of annoying subtleties in some cases that one has to be careful about.
All right, let's thank the speaker again. Our next talk is almost tight multi-user security under adaptive corruptions and leakages in the standard model. This is by Shuai Han, Shengli Liu, and Dawu Gu, and Shuai will give the talk.
Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, I'm Shuai Han. I'm going to talk about almost tight multi-user security under adaptive corruptions and leakages in the standard model. This is joint work with Shengli Liu and Dawu Gu. We are from Shanghai Jiao Tong University. In modern cryptography, to prove the security of a scheme, a common way is to base the scheme's security on a well-studied problem through a security reduction. And a security reduction turns any adversary attacking the scheme in time TA with advantage epsilon A into an algorithm B solving the problem in time TB with advantage epsilon B. And it establishes an inequality between TB over epsilon B and TA over epsilon A with a factor L. If the loss factor L is a constant or at most linear in the security parameter lambda, then we call it tight security or almost tight security, respectively. In this work, we consider the security of cryptographic schemes in multi-user settings under adaptive corruptions, where the adversary can adaptively corrupt some users and obtain their secret keys. This happens since some adversary may snatch secrets from the users by system hacking or from key exposure due to the user's bad key management. And we denote this as the MUC security, which protects the security of uncorrupted users. Yes, I want to switch this. This one. Yeah, this one goes. Okay. Let's continue. It is desirable to achieve tight MUC security. However, in traditional security models, we usually consider only a single user. For example, for public key encryption schemes, we consider IND-CP and CC security. And for signature scheme, we consider the strong EUF-CMA security. Their MUC security counterparts considers multiple users, multiple challenge ciphertexts, and multiple signatures, and are denoted by the MU, MCC, CPA, and CC security for PKE, and strong MUC CMA security for signature schemes. Single-user security generally implies MUC security by hybrid arguments. However, the hybrid argument reduction incurs a very large loss factor, which is at least linear in the number of users, the number of ciphertexts, or the number of signatures. Indeed, many existing works shows impossibility results on achieving tight MUC security. For PKE, Badger et al. Showed that it is impossible to achieve tight MUC security if the relation between public key and secret key is unique or re-randomizable. For signature scheme, Badger et al. Showed similar impossibility results. Besides, Morgan et al. Shows that it is impossible to achieve tight MUC security if the signing algorithm of signature is deterministic. Indeed, there are very few constructions with tight MUC security in the literature, even in the random oracle model. For PKE, there is only one PKE scheme is proved to be tightly MCC CCA secure, and is proposed by Li et al. But it relies on the random oracle model. And for signature schemes, there are only 5 schemes proved to be tightly MUC CMA secure. And only one of them is proved to be tightly strong MUC CMA secure. Here, strong means strong extensional unforgeability, and it is crucial in many applications such as encryption and authenticated key exchange, etc. The only signature scheme with tight strong MUC CMA security is proposed by Dimert et al., but it also relies on the random oracle model. So a natural and challenging question is, can we achieve tight or almost tight MUC security in the standard model? In this work, we answered the question in the affirmative and proposed the first public key encryption schemes with almost tight MUC CCA security in the standard model, as well as the first signature scheme with almost tight strong MUC CMA security in the standard model. The security laws are logarithmic in the security parameter lambda, and the security is based on the standard matrix DDH assumptions, which covers the standard SXDH and the key-linear assumptions. We do not stop here, but further consider a strengthened security notion called MUC and L security, which considers multi-user security under not only adaptive corruptions, but also adaptive leakages. Recall that in the MUC security only considers two kinds of users: the corrupted users whose secret keys are fully exposed to the adversary, and the uncorrupted users whose secret keys are completely hidden to the adversary. In realistic scenarios, there are users whose secret keys are only partially leaked to the adversaries, and these users sit into a situation which is neither corrupted nor uncorrupted, and the MUC security does not consider such users and does not protect their securities. The new MUC and L security additionally takes these users into account and protects their security. In fact, all our schemes can be further strengthened to support key leakages and achieve almost tight MUC and L security. Our PKE scheme can tolerate 1/3 minus small o leakage rates, and our signature scheme can tolerate 1/6 minus small o1 leakage rates. Our schemes are the first schemes with almost tight MUC and L security, no matter in the standard model or in the random oracle model. Moreover, in terms of efficiency, all our schemes are fully compact, means that all the parameters, keys, signatures, and ciphertexts consist of only a constant number of group elements. Next, I will show how to construct our signature and PKE schemes. At the core of our constructions is a new technical tool called publicly verifiable hash-proof system. First, we recall the well-known hash-proof system proposed by Kramer and Shoup. For a hashing key SK, it defines a hash function lambda SK over a domain X, and for any X, we can compute the hash value privately through a private evaluation algorithm directly using SK. And SK is also associated with a projection key PK, which equals alpha SK. And for X in a subset of X, namely the language L, we can use another equivalent public evaluation algorithm to compute its hash value. In 2019, we proposed the concept of quasi-adaptive HPS in a previous work. For QA HPS, it considers multiple languages, and on each language, LI, we can compute a projection key on it, namely the PKI, which equals alpha LI SK. And with PKI, we can evaluate the hash value also with a public evaluation algorithm, which takes PKI as input. And in this work, we further extend QA-HPS to publicly verifiable QA-HPS, which enables public verification of hash values with an extra verification key. We define a verification key generation algorithm mu to compute VK, and a public verification algorithm verify HPS to check the correctness of hash value with the help of VK. We define a set of useful properties for PVQA-HPS. Verification completeness requires that honestly computed hash values always pass the verification, and the verification soundness ensures that it is computationally hard to find an incorrect hash value but pass the verification. We also define a statistical leakage resilience, L0, L, one-time extracting property, which is parameterized by two languages, L0 and L. It requires that conditioned on the projection key PK0 on the first language L0, and conditioned on VK, and some bounded leakage information LSK. Then for any X in the second language L, its hash value should have a high main entropy. This high main entropy ensures that for any unbounded adversary, it is hard to output the correct hash value for any X in L. We also need another building block, namely the quasi-adaptive NISIC proposed by Jutla and Roy. And we will use a tank-based variant, where the proof generation algorithm, verification algorithm, and the simulator also takes a tank as the input. And we require perfect zero knowledge and unbounded simulation soundness. Now we will show how we build our schemes from public verifiable hash proof system and QA NISIC. Our signature scheme is constructed as follows. Its verification key and the signing key are just the verification key and the hashing key of the QA-HPS. And in the signing algorithm, it first samples an instance X from the language L with witness W. Then it computes a hash value of X, and also generates a NISIC proof that X is chosen from the language L, and where the tag is a message to be signed. And in the verification algorithm, we will check the correctness of the hash value publicly by invoking the public verification algorithm of the hash proof system, and we also check the validity of the NISIC proof pi. Next, I will give a high-level overview of our tight, strong MUC&L security proof of our signature scheme. The adversary can obtain the verification keys of all users and issue corruption queries, leakage queries, and signing queries. Finally, the adversary will output a forgery, I star, M star, and sigma star. And the adversary succeeds if the forgery is fresh and valid, and the adversary never corrupts the user I star. Our proof goes with two main steps. In the first step, we will change the way we answer the signing queries. For signing queries, we will generate the pi using the simulator, which is identically distributed by the perfect zero knowledge of the quasi-adaptive NISIC. Then we change the sampling of X from language L to the language L0, which is computationally indistinguishable by the subset membership problem. In this way, we switch the language from L to L0 for signing queries. And now, in fact, we can compute the hash value using the public evaluation algorithm and by using the projection key alpha L0 SKI, which is projected on the language L0. In the second step, we will directly reject the forgery if the X star is not in L. And this is indistinguishable by the unbounded simulation soundness of quasi-adaptive NISIC. Then we will then we will directly check the correctness of the hash value by using the secret key instead of using the public verification algorithm of PVQA-HPS. And this is also indistinguishable because by the verification soundness of PVQA-HPS, because the adversary is hard to output an incorrect hash value but pass the verification. And we stress that all our reductions are tight without resorting to any guessing strategy, because all our reductions have all signing keys of all users to handle the adaptive corruption and leakage queries made by the adversary. Now we can show that the adversary can hardly succeed. This is because now the adversary's knowledge about the secret key in its forgery is limited in the following three parts. The VKI star from the verification in the verification key, and the bounded leakage information L SKI star from leakage queries, and the projection key alpha L0 SKI star from the signing keys, which is a projection key projected on the second language L0. Then by the leakage resilient one-time extracting property of our PVQA-HPS, for any X star in the first language L, its hash value has high mean entropy. So it's hard for the language to output the correct hash value for any X star in the language. Our PKE scheme is constructed from QA-HPS with new properties defined in this work, and also from QA-NISIC. And our PKE shares a similar design with our signature, but their type proofs are quite different. We refer to our paper on imprint for the more details. Finally, I will show the instantiations from matrix DDH. We instantiate the building blocks of our behind our generic constructions. More precisely, we instantiate PVQA-HPS by using the asymmetric pairing groups to accomplish the public verification of hash values inspired by the Qs and V. And we instantiate QA-NISIC by the scheme proposed by Abe et al. And we instantiate the QA-HPS with new properties by adapting the scheme proposed by Han et al. All the instantiations have almost tight security from the standard matrix DDH assumptions. And this, finally, this will give us the almost tightly secure signature and PKE schemes. And moreover, we, based on the PKE and the signature schemes, we in fact construct more primitives with almost tight MUC and L security. And we, including the sign encryption, message authentication code, and authenticated encryption. And we optimize these constructions to achieve better efficiency. Especially to obtain the sign encryption, we use an optimized encrypt then sign paradigm by taking advantage of the similar designs of our PKE and the signature schemes and reusing some components. Let me now conclude the talk. In this work, we propose first a bunch of schemes, including the signature PKE sign encryption, MAC, and authenticated encryption schemes, which are the first achieving almost tight MUC security in the standard model, which are also the first schemes with almost tight MUC and L security. Our schemes are obtained through generic constructions by using a new technical tool called publicly verifiable QA-HPS. And we also give fully compact instantiations from the MDDH over asymmetric pairing groups. That's it. Thanks for your listening.
We're out of time, but maybe one quick question. All right, so let's thank the speaker. And that's the end of the session. Thank you.